Can you hear me?
Oh, there you are, yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much. It's Sam here.
Yes.
I don't think we've seen each other for at least 10 years, and I think you're looking very well on your combination of faith and science. So it gives me faith in your exposition. I wonder about, in relation to the last two questions, about denial and belief. It seems that belief is problematic because we can believe things that are just obviously not true, and we can believe them without much religious faith, as does Trump, it seems. He refuses to believe all kinds of things, perhaps even the impeachment. Can you say a little bit about the human mind in relation to denial and belief?
Yes. Very nice to see you again, Sam. We used to be neighbours in Hampstead. Well, obviously belief can be false. There are lots of false beliefs, and I think one of those false beliefs is scientism, belief in the mechanistic materialist worldview. I think it's a particularly harmful belief. The reason that I wrote these books about spiritual practices is because these practices are not primarily about belief, they're about experience. And I think that beliefs can mislead us, but experiences are much more reliable. If you have an experience of love and connection, then you're feeling loving and connected, and often behave accordingly. I think that the experiences are what it's primarily about, and I think that all religions really start from experience, not belief. The beliefs are an attempt to understand the experiences. The Jewish prophets had this experience of something speaking through them, which was more than them. It wasn't just them. There was some greater presence speaking through them. When Moses encountered God in the burning bush, he was in the presence of a being, a consciousness that was not his own, and which spoke to him about his own nature. I am that I am, a conscious being, a greater conscious being than his own. So I think all these things are formulations of experience, and Jesus' experience of his direct connection with God, which came about first in his baptism, again was experience. And he wasn't telling people to believe a set of doctrines. He was telling them that to have trust and faith. And I think that's where belief is much more powerful and meaningful. If you believe you're going to get better when you're ill, you're more likely to get better than if you believe you're going to get worse. That's the placebo effect, and its opposite, the nocebo effect. So I think that there are some kinds of belief in propositions, which don't really affect our behavior that much. I mean, the scientific worldview is mostly about propositions, that we're descended from apes, that apes, were descended from other mammals and that kind of thing. And it drives a lot of scientists crazy when they find that a lot of Americans don't believe that. They think it's really important that they should believe that, and that it should be taught in every school, and children should be told it's true. I don't think it matters much what people believe about distant evolution. I think it matters a lot about what people believe about our relationship to the universe now, and also what we can put our trust in. And the whole point about trust in God is that if one has trust in God, or if one doesn't like the word God, the all or the absolute or that which is beyond, then one basically feels that one's living in a friendly universe. If one distrusts God, one feels one's living in a hostile, unfriendly universe that's likely to produce a kind of paranoid worldview. And paranoia is very health damaging. I think these beliefs are important when they influence our behavior, and some false beliefs have very negative effects on behavior. But in the end, what changes people is experience. And that's why I think these spiritual experiences are so important. I mean, I believed in the atheist materialist worldview, and what changed me was not logical argument by Christians or Hindus or Buddhists, and I wasn't very impressed by their arguments. What changed me was experiences. The experiences of traveling in India, the experience of meditation, the experience of psychedelics, and other experiences. So again, I think it really comes back to experience being the key, and trust being a key as well, because unless you trust other people and trust in the future, and trust you're going to get better, or trust that you live in a basically friendly world, then you won't have such a happy, successful, or healthy life. But I think the point is that this trust is actually borne out by actually what happens. There are obvious cases where it's not, as in the book of Job in the Old Testament, where Job, a good man, suffered the most appalling misfortunes. So this is a very old question. Anyway, I think I'm not advocating blind belief in anything.
So we have time for maybe one more short question and short answer. Anybody? Yep. Okay. And then we'll wrap up.
Hi Rupert, my name's Richard. In your career as a scientist, investigating latent beliefs, have you ever been asked to work secretly, for example, for the military? Have you been offered a job in the military ever?
In the military?
In the military, with your research. And secondly, do you think research into latent beliefs is being done in secret and being used to keep everyone else down and keep that knowledge away from the population as a whole?
Well, I know that during the period of the Cold War, there was quite a lot of military research on telepathy and clairvoyance, both in America and in the Soviet Union. And I know some of the people who did that research. You know, I know parapsychologists and psychic researchers. There's not very many, only 20 or 30 active researchers in the world, because there's so little funding for it. It's marginalized in most universities, or is actually excluded. So I know the people who ran the Stargate program, and since the Cold War ended, there's been almost no research in these areas, according to them. And, you know, you might think in Britain, since I'm a well-known researcher in these areas, that I might have been contacted by the Ministry of Defence, and in fact I have. About 10 years ago, a chap I met at a conference of the Society for Scientific Exploration, which is a kind of open-minded science group. There was a chap there who was very keen on knowing what was going on, and it was a bit shadowy when you asked him what he actually did. I was convinced he was working for MI5 or something like that, you know, monitoring the leading edges of science. And then a year or two later, he asked if he could come and see me with a colleague of his from the Ministry of Defence. And so I invited them to lunch at my house in Hampstead, and they arrived wearing suits and ties with leather briefcases. And so I said to them, well, gentlemen, what can I do for you? And the man from the Ministry of Defence said, well, let me come straight to the point. He said, if terrorists learn to communicate by telepathy, could we intercept it? And I thought that was a good question. And so I said, no, because telepathy works only between people who know each other very well. You couldn't just listen in. You wouldn't. And I said, and for that reason, I think terrorists would be well advised to set up telepathy training camps. Then, as you know, I wrote a book called The Sense of Being Stared At, about the sense of being stared at, and telepathy and premonitions. And then he said, do you think terrorists could train themselves to know when they were being stared at through a closed-circuit television surveillance system? So I said, yes, I think they probably could, because it's already known that people can detect when they're being stared at in real life. I've done lots of those experiments myself. But some of my colleagues have done experiments using closed-circuit television, surveillance systems, and people can tell when they're being stared at. And I said they could probably train themselves to become more sensitive. And he then said, yes, now what would happen if we introduced a time delay, 10 seconds, 20 seconds? You know, they have it on TV shows where, you know, to cut out swear words and things. We could build it into the circuitry and switch it to, say, 20-second time delay. Would they still be able to tell? And I said, well, I don't know. No one's ever done that experiment. It's a really good question. And I said, you could do it, and I could tell you how. You know, you need volunteers. That's my problem recruiting them. You could just use soldiers who are kind of captive volunteers. So then they had a conversation between themselves, and one of them said, you know, this would be a great development. You know, we could have this developed as a commercial product. And the other one said, yeah, there'd be a huge market with homeland security in the US. And so you could see their minds racing with the possibility of this new improved surveillance equipment that terrorists couldn't detect. And, you know, they got in touch with me afterwards and said, would I help with these experiments or help them set up experiments? And I mentioned it to one or two of my colleagues in psychical research. And they said, you know, you could probably get quite a lot done by working with them, but they said, we advise you not to do it, because if you do, they could classify all your research under the Official Secrets Act, and you'd then just be completely silenced. So I said no. I said to them, you know, I wish you well if you do this research, but I don't feel I can take part in it with you. But I haven't heard much more, and I very much doubt if there's much going on, because what I discovered about military organizations is that there are people who are very open to this in the military world, perhaps much more so than in the academic world. On the other hand, there are also lots of skeptics and materialists in the military world who say it's all rubbish and a waste of public money. So even in the Cold War, there was a big debate went on in the Pentagon about this, and the skeptics almost won. So it's not as if they all think the same way. They don't. Just like in regular life everywhere else, there's a variety of opinions. So anyway, I myself, as far as I know, don't think there's much, if anything, going on in the military world along these lines. I may be wrong, but I know almost everyone who does research in this field, and are their friends. I know them well, and I'm pretty sure if there's anything going on, it's not very much, reassuringly.
I think we'll call it a day. Rupert will be prepared to sell his books to you and to sign his books if you buy one. There are also some Fintry Trust books, Shrine of Wisdom books on sale. So if you would like to avail yourself of the opportunity to purchase them, do this at the end. So I'd just like to say a big thank you again to Rupert and to Sally and to the other speakers. I think we've had a tremendously rich and interesting and engaging evening, and so I ask you to put your hands together, and a big thank you for Rupert.